So I'd like now to introduce our next speaker, Madeline Clarke. Madeline is the founding director of Genio, formerly the Person Centre, which she established in 2008 in order to take a more proactive and systematic approach to accelerate the availability of proven, cost-effective, personalised supports and information. Genio is a non-profit organisation which financially supports a range of innovative services and support models. So I'd like to introduce Madeline. Thank you very much, Madeline.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon. You're all still here. It's Friday afternoon. That's great. I'm going to keep this very short and to the point, and if people are interested then you can talk to me afterwards. Maybe just to explain a little bit about what Genio is, first of all, because some of you don't actually know Genio. So, okay. Well, we like to think of ourselves as a pioneering non-profit, and we're interested in working with the public, private and non-profit sectors. And what we're really trying to do is to stimulate social innovation in Ireland that makes economic sense and that has lasting impact. So like all pioneers, we're learning really fast. You know, we're a very young organisation, quite new on the scene, so appropriately modest, I hope, and respectful of all the other work of organisations that have been, particularly in this field, for so many years. Now, the solution to complex social problems are not ever found in one single organisation, and collaboration has been a dominant theme throughout today and indeed yesterday. So drive, commitment and collaboration are all required. Now, we began working in the disability and mental health sectors in 2008. I'd been working a little bit before that. Indeed, I actually started my career in disability as a psychologist in 1980. So I came back into the field, having been in the children's area, older people's area, migrants, really across, I suppose, the human service spectrum over about 30 years. And it was very interesting coming back into disability and looking at what had and hadn't changed. We began with the support of the Atlantic Philanthropies, and then government rode in primarily through the support of Barbara, who you've just heard, and also in collaboration with the HSE. We founded a separate Genio Trust in 2010. I'll say a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. I suppose just to clarify, Genio is based on really two beliefs. The first belief is that people who are socially excluded need to be supported to become active, participating citizens. So very straightforward. And that's not just good for people who are at risk of being marginalised or excluded. I really believe that's very good for society as a whole. So it's not just that society is being generous by including people who are in some way different. It also really needs to do that to be healthy as a society. So personalised services or personalised supports, although that concept of person-centredness is probably most fully elaborated or fully articulated, particularly in the intellectual disability area, it's not the exclusive preserve of people with disabilities. Personalised services and supports are needed by anybody who requires social services right across the spectrum. The same issues. I mean, Barbara just alluded to the fact that we're currently institutionalising people, older people who need support, but exactly the same issues apply for older people who also want to remain in the community. Same issues apply for anybody who's excluded. The more customised and personalised the supports you can get, well then the better the match is for you in terms of getting what you need to participate as an equal citizen. So we're interested right across, although our work has been in disability and mental health to date. The other very straightforward belief is that people who work together achieve more than people who work separately, and that's such a basic thing to say. I know that it's really cliche. What's interesting, any of you who've worked as consultants, doing those kind of consultation processes with individuals in different areas, will recognise this. You get into these conversations with people sometimes at very senior management levels, and they're amazingly disclosing about their particular concerns and perspectives, and are often, really impressive because they have very developed thinking about, how to solve problems and what needs to be done. Now, obviously, they're all working from their different perspectives with their different sets of constraints. But looking at the different sectors of certainly the public and the private and the non-profit, looking at them separately and working within them separately, it's really clear that there are very sometimes entrenched prejudices about the other sectors, you know. So, for example, just a caricature, you know, people in the private sector often view the non-profit sector as really for losers, you know, people who can't quite hack it in the real world of, you know, the cut and thrust of business. People in the public sector can often look at the non-profits, the voluntary sector, and complain about maybe lack of accountability, or if they'd only shape up, or, you know, whatever. Everybody knows what is said, because it's said on the public airwaves so often about people in the public sector. I mean, the HSE must be the most common whipping boy around for anything that goes wrong. And people in the private sector can look across to the public sector and think, well, you know, they're lazy and they're, you know, insecure jobs for life, etc. Equally, people in both those other sectors can look at people in the private sector and say, you know, those people really haven't a clue, you know. They come in here with their business models and their business way of doing things, and it just doesn't apply. But of course, within any of those sectors, there are huge strengths, just huge strengths, and if they can be harnessed to best effect, it can produce very good outcomes for people who need to be supported. You know, obviously the public sector have that statutory obligation and responsibility to provide leadership, and I think in this sector we're getting terrific leadership from the Office for Disability and Mental Health. The non-profit sector have wonderful opportunities to innovate without some of the constraints that perhaps statutory agencies have, although I have to say in the disability field and the mental health fields, more so than the children's area, often the voluntaries are working under very, very similar constraints as the statutories, and their degrees of freedom have been reduced over the years in terms of ability to innovate. But it's not stopping some very wonderful innovators from doing terrific work, and some of them are in this room today. The private sector have money that they can offer, but they also have some really smart ways of thinking and presenting information and presenting business plans, and they tend not to be quite as sloppy as some of the rest of us in some of the other sectors. There is a cut and thrust there, and there is a business edge that can be very helpful to adopt. But each of those sectors have particular problems in trying to reach the aims that they have, and the vision is collective. I mean, everybody wants to have a situation where people with disabilities have better lives. I mean, that's a completely common theme all the way across those sectors. But when you start to talk about how other people can help, and certainly my experience has been that people in the public sector are quite wary of the private sector helping. They can be very wary of philanthropists. And some of that is to do with philanthropists have to leave. They have to leave at some stage. So they can be really helpful for a period of time, but then they have to go. And if they don't work in some kind of collegial way with government agencies who have ongoing responsibility for these problems, well, then they can end up creating quite a lot of difficulty as they exit. So we all have seen projects which have been piloted on the basis of very well-meaning, well-intentioned philanthropy foundations, and then suddenly the bills start to hit the floor in the government offices when the philanthropist has to go. So there are all kinds of puzzles that each of those sectors have in working with each other. And from Jenny's point of view, what we're interested in doing is trying to support a more collaborative approach. So in terms of the philanthropy side of things, it's very clear that if you can provide philanthropists with opportunities to make an investment that has a really good impact, that maybe has a lasting impact so they can leave a legacy, but also provides them with a way out, with an exit strategy, so they don't end up paying for projects that then they have to, or they hope will be adopted by somebody else as they go. So that's one of the things, one of the puzzles that we were kind of trying to solve, I suppose. We're kind of situated there in that kind of, you know, supportive role, I suppose, doing what we can to bring people together. And as I talk through what we're doing in disability mental health, it'll become a bit clearer. Just before I do that, I suppose the preoccupation really for us is, and you can order these in whichever way you want, but it's really looking across the social service spectrum. It's to try and reduce waste, because waste, you know, incurs enormous opportunity costs for people who would otherwise be getting support if the money was better used and more fairly distributed. So increasing efficiency is a really important goal. Reducing dependency. often, as we see, and people have referred to it several times over the last couple of days, you know, the way lives have become over-professionalised. And we were talking at dinner last night, and Brian was saying, you know, talking about the tendency for bureaucracies to want to create more bureaucracy. And I was saying, but we all have that tendency. You know, if you ask anybody what's needed, they'll say, well, more of me. You know, I'm a psychologist. I think if we had more psychologists, that would be really helpful. Researchers will tell you what's required is, you know, great. We need more to understand this problem a bit more. We need more research. We all think we're really important, and we're all critical. So I think that has led then to a situation where, for people who are vulnerable, their lives have been colonised by people who feel they have critical contributions to make. And sometimes they have, but sometimes those contributions are less critical, and they certainly should be less dominant. And then reducing group-focused approaches that really are very hit and miss. They're generally get reduced to lowest common denominator, and they don't produce a good response to the individual. So that's the kind of backdrop thinking. And then just very briefly, what do we do in terms of disability and mental health? Well, clearly there's a big programme of transformation that has been, you know, started to be let loose, and we're trying to help in three ways. The first thing we're trying to do is to provide some funding. Now, rather than providing funding that is 100% or almost 100% funding for innovative projects or for projects that are aligned to this new way of working that we're all describing here, what we decided to do was to work with the HSE and with the department, combine funds to give relatively small grants to stimulate innovation, to help people who are heading in this direction, who have capacity or can develop capacity to really change lives in a very positive way. So in order to get near any of this funding, as anybody would know who's had a go at applying to the Genio Trust for a grant, you have to have a sustainability plan. You know? So if you don't have a sustainability plan about how you're going to continue the change that this grant is going to help fund, well then it just doesn't get onto the table. You know? And by sustainability plan, I don't mean we'll take your money and we'll have a raffle for the rest. You know, there has to be a really worked out. This is where, you know, this is the resource we're going to use. This is how we're going to transform the resource across after the year of the grant when it finishes. This is the way we're going to do business. This is why this front-loaded investment or this home funding is going to help bring about this change that then can be sustained in the following ways. The other thing we do is we try and build capacity. Now, obviously, we're not alone in this. I think the last 2 days, the Federation and the Centre for Disability Law and Policy it's just, you know, a marvellous example of capacity building for a number of people at different levels that have been at these events. So we're trying to add to what's there where we think we can add value, and we do this in a whole lot of different ways. Sometimes it's about bringing in some external expertise from abroad. Sometimes it's about convening people who maybe just somebody outside the sector, bringing them together so that they can take the next step. That kind of works. The most important capacity building we feel we should be investing in is helping people with disabilities and their families to become stronger advocates for themselves. That's the most important thing, because when we're gone and everybody else is gone, they are the best people at putting the argument. And in fact, before anybody else is gone, they should be pushing everybody else out. They should be able to be doing this for themselves. And we've been trying with Martin and some other people to build a cross-sector coalition across disability, the different areas of disability and mental health, with some quite senior advocates who've been around the system for a long time. They're not part of the system, but they know how to work with the system. And we're really offering just some facilitation and convening opportunities for them to work out whether they have a common agenda, and if so, how they might collaborate to work towards that in a more impactful way. Okay. The third thing we're doing is trying to produce evidence, and again, there are lots of excellent research projects underway. You know, in our country, the NDA has the major role in that regard. What we're trying to do is produce evidence of people whose lives are being changed primarily through the grants we're giving. So we're trying to find out, how do people who have different kinds of disabilities and mental health issues across different geographical settings, how are their lives being changed as they're supported to move from institutional care or from situations where they're less happy to situations where they're more independent and they're more included. How does it work in terms of their quality of life? What does it cost, crucially, within an Irish setting? And then what has made it work? What are the ingredients that really help make this work? Of course, we've found as we've gone along that some of the things that make this work are within the realm of organisational change, but increasingly we're identifying with service providers those system-wide barriers that need to be lifted. So there's a design of management of change issue at the organisational level, but more crucially, I think at this point, there's a management of change issue across the system, which is what Brian Salisbury has been talking about in British Columbia, and which is just where we're at the moment in terms of just being on the brink of designing an implementation plan. That's really a big change management plan. So just to give you a sense of the projects, there are all different kinds of projects all over the country. And just to give you a little bit of detail before I finish on some of those. Okay, well, we've allocated 5.8 million for 73 projects over the last 2 years, and we're only doing this for 2 years. Okay, and that leveraged a further 11 million that we know about. It probably has leveraged more, but in terms of what we can identify, that's what it leveraged. So what those grants did was they part-funded projects, and then organisations put in the rest themselves, or they drew grants from other places to put in the rest. Okay. And what did that produce? Well, there are over 400 people who are being supported to live and remain outside institutional settings. About 190 of those people are moving out of institutions. Okay. Now, what's really important about that is that they move out and that the spaces aren't backfilled. So while we in Genio can help people like yourselves to create really good alternatives in the community and do that in a very person-centred way, it'll be very disappointing if we're doing that and simultaneously those places are being backfilled. So it takes a much bigger strategy, of course, than simply providing a bit of innovation money to reduce numbers in institutional care. It takes a strategy that involves, working out what you do with the emergencies that result in admissions to institutions. How do you plan ahead and have some capacity ahead so that you don't have to take people back into institutions? Or if you do have to do that on a Friday evening, what's your plan on Monday morning for moving on? There are a lot of pieces in this jigsaw that need to be put together. But I think from the perspective of the people involved in these projects that are moving and changing their lives, that is really heartening, and I suppose that's where you get the inspiration to do any of this work. Almost 1,000 people then who use services have received some kind of training, information or practical support. Over 400 family members have received training and support, and then over 390 staff and community members have received some kind of training and skills. All of that kind of capacity building has been judged against criteria that are really defined by what it is to promote person-centred practice. So what we're trying to do is, certainly get to having as much impact in the lives of people as possible, but also do some capacity building so that, that can help in the next year and the year after that. Okay. Maybe just to give you just a brief flavour of some of the projects. For example, we've been talking here in the last couple of days about the importance of building family and service user capacity, or the capacity of people with disabilities. And we certainly, in the first year that we were providing grants, we really went for that. Any application that was made that came from a family group or a group that were really working seriously with people who are using services, we gave those really, clear priority. So, as a result, in Galway, a family network was established with 45 families who are now coming together, sharing skills, expertise, helping each other out. Martin is here to talk about the direct payments project that we're trying to help support and work with Martin and his colleagues to establish, which would be the first in Ireland. In the mental health area, there's a very innovative peer support project where over 230 people have been trained to become peer befrienders of people who've had mental health issues, and they're being supported to really, really work alongside people who are having, really serious difficulties in their lives, and very integrated with the specialist services as well. in the autism area, the Autism Initiative Group have worked with 129 parents, again trying to enhance their skills and enhance the skills of people with autism to plan and work out what it is they need and how they might go about getting it. Rachel here, who's chairing today's session, is a leader in the LEAP, the Leading Education Advocacy and Planning Project, which again has trained at the last count over 58 parents with the same kind of, developing a vision, working out steps. How do you realise this for your son or daughter? We also we've tried, where possible, to capacity build within whatever setting is useful. So, we had, for example, 3 guys who wanted to learn to cook in Cork in a very institutional setting with mental health difficulties, and they got a very small grant to get a cookery course for themselves, and it was really interesting just watching the way that developed. I mean, on the first session, the nurses arrived with these guys, and the chef, the cook, produced the knives. And there was a big conversation about, these people can't be allowed knives, can't be doing this. And eventually the cook said, well, I'll tell you what, lads, you go for a walk. These people have to be able to use knives if they're going to be able to cook. The nurses went for a walk. The guys know how to cook. They're moving out now with their colleagues as a result of a grant that they're getting from the Genio Trust this year into independent living, and they're very good cooks and have cooked a meal for one of our team actually when they went down. So, we've tried to look at what's going to have most value, what's going to travel for people. The other thing that we're very interested in doing, and we had one applicant who did a very good job on this, is building the capacity of the community. So an organisation called DESA did a very good job of providing information and training and support to ordinary community groups so that they would integrate children with disabilities in the mainstream activities in their communities. The HSE in Donegal undertook a very useful project with school leavers with physical disabilities, teaching them how to get the best value out of the personal assistance that they were going to be allocated, and how to really get on top of being organised about using that. So really our approach, I suppose, has been to try and identify who are the leaders here around the country, who's doing really good work, and there are many more that we haven't been able to reach. So it was very, very heartening, I suppose, particularly where people are talking now about, we've had an old system and a new system. I think, if we've learned one thing from the whole HSE project here, it has been that it's very important not to be drawing the line under everything that has gone before a certain date. It's much more important to find out where the strengths are and build on those and bring those into the new system and magnify them and help them to step up onto a more national stage. So we've been very heartened by all the leadership and the brilliant work that we've been able to find around the country. And as I say, we've only been confined by the amount of money we've had to distribute. I think if we'd had more money, there would be more leadership and more very good projects there. They're not all perfect. Some are learning. Lots are learning from each other, and we're certainly learning a lot from them. So that's just a bit of a flavour of what we do and how we're trying to do it. I hope it's useful, and as I say, you can always talk to us at another stage about more detail. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Madeline. Madeline there talked about Genio as a pioneering organisation that is on a steep learning curve, and certainly as somebody who received a grant on behalf of my group LEAP from Genio, I have found them, as have the other members of LEAP, to be a very engaging and engaged agency who's willing to talk and to listen and really take on board what people are saying as they arrive into the doors in Mullingar. They always get a great welcome from Madeline and the team. Genio is based, Madeline told us, on 2 beliefs around how to create the conditions for social inclusion and the importance of people working together. So absolutely that point is not lost. I think on this room that, we need to work together. None of us can do this on our own, and collaboration is critical. Relationships are critical. We've heard that theme again and again today. So then Madeline also reflected on how many sections of our society need and receive personalised or bespoke supports. And again, that's something that we need to remember and reflect on. Madeline then gave us a window into her work and a particular view across the three sectors that she works with, the public, the private and the third sector, and talked to us a little bit about the various prejudices that exist about one in relation to the other. And again, you know, that's what we can do on the ground. We can talk to each other, we can engage, and we can attempt to break down some of those prejudices. Certainly they exist, you know, between people with disabilities and family members. They exist between service providers and service recipients. So dialogue is critical at this particular break in practices as we attempt to transform and change the policy and practice landscape. So Madeline also mentioned that the GENIO have funded, supported and continue to mentor 72 projects. And I would certainly feel, as I know many people in this room do, that GENIO has financed some of the most innovative work in this sector in Ireland in the last 20 years. So, you know, noticing innovation and supporting it is one of the many things that GENIO has contributed.